Hi everybody, and here is another video about melody writing, and this technique can also be used as part of your accompaniment. It works really well in bass lines, for examples, and it's about the device called a sequence. So here is the definition of what a sequence is. Alright, and then you're looking at the musical example on the left from the world's dullest national anthem, and you can see there is a sequence involved. So we need to know what the phrase that's going to be repeated is first, and that in this example takes 2 bars. Send her victorious. Now it doesn't matter if you're looking at the treble or bass clef here, both of them are sequences. I'm going to be calling out the treble clef for you guys to follow along with. So send her victorious is the original statement of the motif. Happy and glorious is the sequence. It's being repeated at a different pitch, 1 degree lower in the scale in this example. So send her victor are all D's, all on the same note, and then we descend by a second and then descend by a second again, and that takes us to us, and then we have the sequence. And if you notice, it's 4 of the same notes, and then we descend by 1 note in the scale, and then we descend another note in the scale. So that is a good example of a sequence. Now if you are going to be doing this in your composition, and it's a very good idea because it shows that you can develop your work, it's a great way of proving development. Here are some things that you guys have got to consider. I've given an example in a minute, and I'll put it in Logic for you guys to have a look at. It's really tricky to actually write one if you've got a long sequence. Alright, and make sure that you follow all of those tips bit by bit. If I was you, I would screenshot that if I was you, and then you can refer back to it as you need to. Right, now this is a little bit tricky here because I've got toys to play with. Okay, so we get out of Keynote if I can, and then we go to Logic. Right, here is a really famous example of a sequence from A Christmas Carol. He said, "Come on, son." Still not the bit I wanted. Okay, so there we go. Might have scuffed at the ending, but you know, don't want to get sued by copyright, for example. Right, so here we go. There's the original statement of the melody. This is the thing that's going to be sequenced, and then we have, notice the same rhythm, and then the same rhythm again, and then we break it because sequences can be too repetitive if you're not careful. And then we need to know the intervals. So here we're starting on a G, and then we are descending by a second, the note next door in the scale, and another second, and then we ascend back up, drop by a third. From here to here is exactly the same formula. We are descending by a note, descending by a note, ascending by a note, ascending by a note, and then descending by a third. If you're trying to work out your sequence, I really recommend that you have a scrap of paper to hand. You can use your workbook if you're with me, and that you actually sort of work out the number code. So for me, that starts on a G and then goes down to an F. That's my scale written out. We're working in C major. That is down 1 note in the scale, so I would put -2 because it's down a second. 1, 2. Always in music count your starting note as 1. So 1, 2. It then descends another second. 1, 2. It goes up by a second, so I would put +2. It goes up by a second, put +2, and then -3. 1, 2, 3. So that goes down by a third. For example, if you wanted to come down by a third from B, you would count B as 1, and you would go 1, 2, 3. And of course it works in the other direction. Say you had an ascending third, starting on C. The third up would be 1, 2, 3. When you were doing your sequence and you needed to start with a third, you would do whatever note you're starting on, F for example, and you would count up 1, 2, 3. So when you're calculating your intervals, make sure that you use the first note and you count it as 1 to work out your formula. Now, here is the example that I've prepared for you. Okay, so we have this one, and we have this one, to see if you don't follow the dots too well. Okay, there we go. Now, starting on C, we go down by a note, we go back to it, and then we up by a third, and then I come down by a third. Notice we've got crotchet rest there, that doesn't matter. Down by a third, descend by a note, descend by a note. Then I make the same statement again, and then here I'm being a bit cheeky and I have a mini sequence. This one here is then copied one note up in the scale. So instead of being CBA, it's then DCB. And then here is my sequence. It's the whole thing, whole passage again, up by a third. Okay, so that formula is the same as that one there. First note, down by a second, back to it, up by a third. And here is that as a sequence. Up by a third this time, so starting on an E. Start on it, down by a second, back to it, up by a third. Sounds like this. Here's a sequence. Okay, and it just ties those two statements of the theme together. It's not a straight repetition, which is really boring. It's a way of keeping everything sounding cohesive, and that's a really important element of most exam specs. All right. Now, the reason why I chose to do it like that is that if you are writing a verse, for example, for a pop song, it's a great way of keeping your verse interesting. Not particularly common way of doing things at the moment, but a few years ago when people were a bit more interested in writing complex melodies, which you need to for GCSE, it was just a routine way of doing things. Have your opening statement starting on the root of the piece. I'm working in C major. And then once you've finished your first phrase, can you repeat it all but starting up a third? Let's put the chords in underneath so you can hear it with the chords underneath. And I've used a 4-chord song. Okay, so that last little bit there, we can get away with it because, and if I put this up as well so you can see it, it goes F, E, D. I'm working in C major. That last chord in that chord sequence is chord 5. I can get away with having an F over chord 5 because it's the 7th. The E in the middle is just a passing note, and then I land on another chord tone, D, in chord 5. So we know it's working. Right. How do you actually do this? I'll just repeat the chord change so you can see how, like, the process. So I'm copy and pasting that across. If you're not sure what all the colours mean, watch the video on chord sequences in colour. Makes a lot more sense then. And then if I do the melody here so you guys can see it. Right. And then I'll just increase the size of this. Now, this is the original statement. Okay, so that's the thing that's going to be sequenced. Alright, so here's how I managed to do that. First off, I did select all. And then what I made sure I did is I just made a mental note of what space I was going to leave at the start of the bar. It's all crotchet rest I'm working in 4/4. That means I've got 4 semiquavers there to watch out for, and that's going to go there. Alright, so I'm option clicking to cut and paste. You might be using a different DAW. Now, that is fine, except it's not a sequence yet because it's not repeated at a different pitch. Now, a good trick is to try and do it up a third, especially if you're using it for the second half of a verse or a chorus. And that note there is an E, and theoretically everything should make sense. However, there's a little problem. As you can hear, big issue with the sequence there. And the reason why that's happened is that if you do that little trick where you just shove it up with cut and paste, the chances of you having an exact copy of your sequence is very, very slim, that works over the chords. And the reason for that is because when we are moving up and down these the scale, not all of these are a major second, a whole step. That's a whole step, and that's a whole step, but this is a half step. This is a whole step, this is a whole step, this is a whole step. If we were to come back to C again here, it would be a half step. So you now need to adjust what you've done to make sure, excuse me, pressed too many buttons on the computer. Wrong button Saturn, again. Okay, so this note here is fine. Logic will tell me that's in E in a minute. There we go. But this note here, D sharp, that's not in the scale. That is not in C major. So and it's a good idea to work diatonically. There are other ways of doing this, but I would recommend we, crawl before we can walk. You need to adjust that so it's the right note down in the scale. So it may not be a half step or a semitone like the original statement, but that's not important. What's important is that it's the next note down in the scale. Okay, so if we were carrying on C here, so B would be there. That is a second, that is fine. I'm starting the sequence on E. A second down from E in C major is D. It's a whole tone, a whole step, not like it is from C to B, a half step. So then what you would need to do is just comb through and just make sure that all of your notes fit in your scale. So 1/3 up from an E should be a G, but Logic has done a major third. I need to make it a minor third. The next note down from E in C major is a D, not a D sharp. So I just need to lower that like that to the D. And then this one here, we know needs to be a D. We know this needs to be a G sharp. And then this D sharp here doesn't belong in C major. I need to lower it to D. So this is what I'm talking about in this part of the slide here. Where's my keynote speech gone? There we go. You need to adjust to fit the scale if necessary. That's a really important thing, because if it sounds wrong, I bet you anything that's what the issue is. So again, like we always say, work in your key system. Right, I'll just play that for you so you can hear it, and then we're done. Okay. So, original melody. Right, adjusted. Or missed. And this is why you always listen to your work. Let's do that again. Okay, I don't mind making mistakes. Here we go. is a sequence, up a third. That's absolutely fine. Don't have a problem with that at all. Right, just one last thing to say before we finish and sign off, and that is sequence comes up in musical terminology quite a lot. This is the composing device most commonly found in melodies, called a sequence, where you take a pattern of notes and repeat it at a different pitch. You might hear me or other people talk about chord sequences. Chord sequences are slightly different. That is the order of the chords that you've got going on your piece. So for example, in this one it's A minor, F, C, G, or 6, 4, 1, 5, the 4-chord song. You might hear people talk about sequencing like as in the computer process, and when I'm inputting all these notes and creating projects and music by inputting stuff on music technology or a DAW, a DAW, digital audio workstation, that's sequencing. So you might come across the word sequencing in different ways, shapes and forms. This is the melodic form of sequencing, the compositional device, a sequence. So just make sure you get that clear in your head. Okay, thanks for watching. I look forward to hearing your examples of work.